Hello, everybody. As always, welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. I am going to take your questions. So we are 4 lectures into the Esoteric Keys of Disclosure lecture series. And I thought it would be a good idea to just go through and look at your comments and just make sure that everything is clear and understood and address any questions that you have. So let's dive in. This first question is from Rosalind Fay. And you said, the spiritual hierarchies make perfect sense for our solar system. But what about the Pleiadians, Andromedans, Lyrans, etc., who also have a relationship to the Earth and humanity, but aren't part of our solar system? Do you consider them to be true aliens, or how do you communicate with people who claim to be in communication with them? From what I've heard, it seems the Galactic Federation is mostly made up of these beings who are outside of our solar system, but within our galaxy. How do we talk about these relationships that extend beyond the solar system boundaries? Okay, so in classical esotericism, the solar system more or less is synonymous with the cosmos. There definitely are delineations where in understanding creation and understanding the formation of the solar system and human development, there is a distinct difference between a solar system and a galaxy and the universe and all of that. But a lot of the time, when you hear about, or it is the case when you hear about the spiritual hierarchies, you know, the spiritual hierarchies are not just the spiritual hierarchies of the solar system. They're the spiritual hierarchies of creation as we know it. So everything that we can perceive essentially falls under the umbrella of the spiritual hierarchies. And it's only the lower tiers of the spiritual hierarchies that actually become specific and materialized enough to represent, you know, a planetary sphere, or that get more even to the point where you have angels that essentially guard and guide human beings. And so the angelic hierarchies go from the absolute most vast concept you can imagine, including governing and ruling the entire cosmos. So not just our solar system, but every star, right? And then it gets more and more personified and more individuated. So you have angelic kingdoms that look after and are the arms of God for lesser structures like suns and things like this. And so in the New Age and modern spirituality, there is a lot of conflation that goes on. So there isn't a lot of understanding of the different densities and how they interact with each other in regards to the creation of the solar system and essentially the creation and metamorphosis of the human being. Sirius, the Pleiades, and and Arcturus actually have a huge role in human development. And there's a lot of secrets and mysteries around other stars, but there's sort of a certain time in which we can access these mysteries. And we can't really understand what the Pleiades are and the beings that reside there, or what beings are in the Lyra system, or what beings are in the Arcturus system, until we reach a very advanced level of development ourselves. Essentially, until we get to, you know, Vulcan stage, or at least around that stage of development where we ourselves are beginning to function as a star or as a solar human being. That is when we have access to star knowledge that's really beyond our star. And so the problem with the New Age is that there's this idea that there's all of these different alien beings that are communicating from all these different star systems. And in reality, we wouldn't actually be able to comprehend those star systems until significantly further in our development. And what's happening is that in our very ancient past, there were streams of influence from these star systems, but the Earth wasn't even solid at that time, right? There's a very deep mysteries, especially with the Pleiades, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. It's not, I'm not going to get into it in this part of the series, but a lot of the Pleiadian forces are actually held in actual local planetary spheres, such as Venus. And so, you know, our sun essentially steps down all other stars' energy to be received. So you don't just communicate with like the Pleiades or Sirius or like Lyra, you're actually communicating with first our sun, and then through the language of our sun, which is pretty much everything that's meaningful to us, then we can understand other things. So until we really graduate from our sun, we're not going to actually fully be able to understand other fixed stars. So when you see another star, another sun, you're looking at a different developmental scheme with different parameters and fundamentally a different development than us. Now, there may be certain times in development in the cosmos where we have overlapping with certain other star systems, but if it's with another star, like the Pleiades or Arcturus or something like that, then that's going to be when our planet is not solid yet, okay? And then once we come into solidification and we materialize, like what happened in the Atlantean epoch and onward, really, communication with other spheres changes, okay? And we no longer interact with beings from other spheres the way that we did when the world was less physical than, you know, when the world was in the Lemurian period or even earlier periods where human beings were essentially like an infantile developing being, and we were basically dominated by beings from the angelic hierarchies. They were basically our leaders, and they were teaching us, and they were guiding us out of pure love and service. And then once we begin to get our eye and our individuality, the whole solar system and really cosmos at large shifts, right? And now we evolve as individuals. And we don't have these beings from other spheres that are kind of lording over us, that are going to come back and save us, or that are going to give us these advanced technologies, or that are our parents, or that created us with genetics. You know, these are all traps that lead us into deep misunderstandings about our own evolution and our own history. They're designed to trap you by bringing up things that have happened in the past and saying this is still happening. And that's how you get trapped, is you get trapped in essentially a past ideology, thinking that it's actually still going on. And that's how you get trapped in that hall of mirrors, by not understanding the actual developmental time and phase we are in. So we haven't had any beings that are directly from the Pleiades or consciousness from the Pleiades that have been physically here or here in their complete beingness for, I would say, hundreds of thousands of years, if not more. That essence is actually, when people talk about the Pleiadians and the Pleiadian essence, are talking about a specific time of development for humanity and the spiritual hierarchies in the cosmos. And then the same thing with other star systems. But again, when you're looking at a different star system, you're looking at a very different developmental system than our own. It has a different star guiding it. It has a fundamentally different logos, okay? So every every star, every sun that we see is a logos. It's a system within itself. So whatever we can see may be somehow related to us in some extent. There may be overlap or we wouldn't be able to perceive it. But just because we can perceive it, it also doesn't mean that it completely overlaps with our planet and resonates with our system all the time, right? So again, in the earlier periods of human and planetary development, this would be associated with the Polarian epoch, the Hyperborean epoch, and part of the Lemurian epoch. The planet is in an involution, okay? So it's kind of like a spiral inwards. And it is receiving the astral and etheric seeds and impulses of the spiritual hierarchies, and also as part of the spiritual hierarchies, different planetary spheres, and the developments in the cosmos that we are going to continue on. Now, the majority of that is obviously held within our own system. You know, this perpetual desire and impulse to go beyond our star and into these unknown worlds and into other stars is really rooted in a Luciferian escapism desire, where you don't want to settle in, focus in, get in your body, understand the earth, and get to work. It's like a desire instead to escape. And so we have to be very careful that these desires to identify as an alien, to identify more as a being of the cosmos than your life as you are as a human being. I mean, this is escapism. It's taking one little truth, which is that the soul is essentially divine and has lived in other worlds, right? Especially the planets that are part of our solar system school. It's taking that and then hyper focusing on it to the point that you're disassociating from your own physical body and the earth. And no matter how important you say the earth is and your physicality is and your life is, if you're identifying as an alien, you're rejecting your earthly form. And you're rejecting the advancement that is available for you, and the peace that's available for you, and the wisdom that's available for you right now when you actually come into your physicality, when you actually come into the reality that you are more of the earth than you are anything else, because you wouldn't be on the earth. If you were meant to be incarnating in the Pleiades, you would be there. Okay? If you were meant to be incarnating as, as some kind of other entity, you would be that. And so there's this hyper disassociation that's going on where your humanness is already assumed. And there's this disassociation and disidentification, and it's dangerous. It's spiritually dangerous for you, because you have to watch where your mind is going and what you're identifying as, because disassociation is so easy today. And that's exactly what a lot of people are doing. And we usually do that because we suffered a lot of pain. We suffer a lot of trauma. We come into spirituality to relieve that suffering. But then we end up using spiritual concepts to escape rather than develop. And this is exactly what is going on in a lot of cases. So the earth and humanity does have a deep history with the Pleiades. There's no question about it. But it's not exactly as it's being portrayed in the New Age today. It's been greatly exaggerated, and there's a lot missing. It's not just like these Nordic-looking beings that come around and they fly around in spaceships. That's a distortion. The actual secret of the Pleiades is much deeper and much more connected to earlier human development than we can imagine. But we have to actually understand Venus first, and there's other concepts that we have to understand first. You can't just jump into the knowledge of another star system unless you understand first its implications in our own star system, okay? Our own solar system. So you can't jump into this wild knowledge about Sirius or the Pleiades or Arcturus or Lyra until you first have an expert or a very good level of knowledge about our own solar system that we are in, because our solar system actually is an expression and continuation of other things going on. So if we don't understand what's in front of us, we're never going to clearly understand what's out there. And everything that's going, every planet, every sphere that we have here is consolidating anyway. Does that make sense? So we've essentially, in the New Age, what's happened is we've taken incredibly important celestial aspects of our own development that have more to do with the spiritual hierarchies or the angelic hierarchies than anything to do with like aliens. And when someone starts talking about something as though it's an extraterrestrial or as though it's an alien, this is an inverted ideology, because beings that have helped us in our evolution out of pure love and have sacrificed their own form, their own mind for our development, these beings are associated with the angelic hierarchies. And then if they've completed human evolution as we know it, they're masters, they're spiritual masters. So they're angels or they're spiritual masters. They're not aliens. At no point does that word even make sense? And so when I see people coming in from that angle that like the aliens are gods or extraterrestrials are gods, that immediately says to me that there's not an understanding about human incarnation in our own solar system. This is not a spiritual teaching. This is a materialist teaching that's trying to get at something much greater. Okay. And so what's the next part of your question here, Rosalind? Do you consider them to be true aliens? And how do you communicate with people who claim to be in communication with them? There's really when people say interdimensional, that's a spiritual phenomenon. It's a more kind of scientific, specific word for spiritual phenomenon. If someone's talking about interdimensionals or interdimensionality, like at the recent UFO hearings, you're talking about a spiritual phenomenon, because once you get out of the third dimensional plane, you're in the spirit realm. You're in what would be called, for thousands of years in the mystery traditions, you're now in the spirit planes. And the spirit planes, there's very specific knowledge about this. There's the lower planes, which in the New Age is sometimes called the lower astral, but more specifically and more precisely in anthroposophy, it's called the eighth sphere. And within that is a bunch of basically degraded looking beings. You know, they look like golems, they look like chimeras, and they look essentially like a lot of aliens look. They look like what people would think monsters would look like. And this is sort of like a catch-all that surrounds around the densest planet in the solar system, which is Earth. And it sort of catches all of the different beings that have fallen out of the life wave in the solar system. Okay? And they begin to sort of fall backwards into the abyss. And so the moment that you get trapped in the eighth sphere, you immediately begin to devolve, because you're too inverted to evolve. And so their only chance of actually surviving and not falling completely in the abyss and completely going into being, as Edgar Cayce would say, reamalgamated in the planet Saturn, or in Christian esoterica, we would call it the second death. All right. Now, again, in anthroposophy, the deepest teachings of this are through Rudolf Steiner and his teachings on Ahriman and Lucifer and the eighth sphere. That's where you're going to find this teaching in the most depth thus far. So you have this whole realm that's, surrounding the Earth as the Earth goes through this initiation into adulthood, essentially, and having an I and individuality. And you have all of these dark beings that have fallen out of human development, that are degrading every day into inhuman forms, right? And in order to not go through the incredibly painful process of essentially death, they try to influence humanity. And they do this through basically trying to spiritually influence or trying to get in people's heads through the mental plane, through the mind. So what a lot of people actually think are aliens are beings that are literally from the lower planes. They're lower beings. Their whole existence in their mind depends on tricking you. And they often have incredible amounts of wisdom and knowledge, but they're not loving. So it's something that when you're channeling or when you're connecting with spirit and you feel like an entity has, connected with you, you really have to be very, very careful that you're just not being lied to. And unfortunately, a lot of people feel like they're not being lied to, but I think they are channeling very dark things. And these dark beings, they know that deep within us, we have a kind of memory, we have a kind of spiritual memory of the past. And so they know that within every person, there's probably a desire to return to the days of early Atlantis and Lemuria, when we had these beings from the angelic hierarchy that were walking amongst us, that were our leaders, that were our teachers, that loved us. And so they take advantage of that. They take advantage of the reality that in our distant past, we lived differently on the earth. We did walk amongst the gods. There were beings that came from other spheres, and it was basically a world that was not fallen. So we were like little children. We were learning. And then again, once we get our individuality, and we develop self-awareness, then these beings, they walk away. Their job is done. They're no longer looking to be leaders. They're no longer looking to lord over humanity. They're not looking to control humanity. Their job is done. And they either incarnate into the form, okay? So the form has now reached a level of potential that is even beyond them, right? And so they either incarnate into the form and evolve to become the 10th hierarchy in the hierarchy of angels in our solar system, or they back away and choose another developmental path. So I am talking about the actual beautiful, benevolent, spiritual leaders from the angelic hierarchy that people like to call aliens, but really shouldn't be called that, because again, they're literally from our own developmental they're literally from our own developmental system. And if you were to read them psychically, you would probably think they were from the future. Okay, because what they have and where they're coming from is essentially where we're going. So that's why so many people think that these beings are from the future, is because they're really kind of from a developmental future, if this makes sense. There's lots of different ways in which you can kind of look at it, but to think that they're foreign or alien really it's not the right accent. And if you don't label it correctly, you're not going to enter into the topic correctly. We have to view beings from the spiritual hierarchies that are associated with certain planetary spheres as being in a parallel developmental system to our own. So Venus is a parallel developmental plane or sphere to us. And everything that we can see and perceive has something in common with us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to perceive it. There are certain life forms that coexist, but we literally could never perceive them because we do not have anything in common with them, right? So there's a deep secret in what we can perceive and what we cannot perceive when it comes to spiritual worlds. So the Galactic Federation is mostly made up of these beings who are outside of our solar system. We talk about these relationships that extend. Yeah, so the Galactic Federation material is basically trying to make the spiritual hierarchies and the beings within the spiritual hierarchies that have helped human development, aliens. It is basically redefining something that we already knew and understand for thousands of years. It's redefining these beings as aliens because the beings in the spiritual hierarchies do associate themselves with different planetary spheres at certain times. So it's literally like looking back and seeing what many earlier traditions would call the angels of Venus. Okay, so in anthroposophy, we say the angels of Venus or the angels from Venus. You know, in theosophy, they used more Eastern terminology and they would say the lords of the flame, the lords of Venus. And they would talk about Sunat Kumara. And they would talk about these angelic beings, these angelic humans that are part of the angelic hierarchy, but were coming through a planetary sphere, mainly Venus. Venus is our direct connection, though beings from other systems would come as well if they could. But they were lesser visitors compared to Venus. And there's a very deep Venus-Pleiades connection as well. But we will get into that later because in order to get into the extrasolar stuff, we have to understand our solar system and the spiritual hierarchies first. We cannot enter into that until we get this first. It just won't be possible. So ultimately, there is this beautiful past in our history where, again, we had these beautiful relationships with these angels, especially from Venus. And then there are also lesser visitations as well, as humanity and the earth was being imbued with karmic information and energies and forces from other spheres. And the earth and humanity was essentially consolidating all these forces. But this is a spiritual thing. The earth, at the peak of all of that going on, the earth isn't even a physical form. It's basically an etheric form, and all of these beings are etheric beings. You know, when the beings, at the height of the beings from Venus being here, was an etheric earth. It wasn't even a physical earth. The story of Venus and the Pleiades and other planetary, lesser planetary connections is different after Atlantis. It's very different after Atlantis because these beings actually incarnated into the human form. They took a human body because by the time we get to that Atlantean epoch, we now have our I, we now have our individuality. And at that point, should we evolve with the earth into the later stages of our development, we would be beyond the angels of Venus at that time. So they help us. They develop us till we're sort of at their level in a physical sense. And then once we begin to develop organs and capacities that are potentially beyond them, they incarnate into the form. And this is how the human being is directly connected to the spiritual hierarchies, because the angelic beings from the spiritual hierarchies will assist the developing humanity. And then once it started to get these capacities that would potentially be beyond their own, then they incarnate into the form. So they weren't necessarily, they were always connected with the earth in this sense, and they enter the life wave at a certain point, physically incarnating. All right. So that's why all of this Galactic Federation stuff gets really weird, is because it negates certain events that happened. So why do you have, you know, essentially what would be the Venusians, but they're called Pleiadians for some strange reason? Why would you have them flying around in a ship giving you advice when the highest beings that came from other spheres incarnated into humanity? So they're walking amongst you. This is how it was possible for Christ to take on the sun, and why he associates himself with the morning star. There's a very deep past that we have to understand about the angelic beings from other spheres. But it's not the Galactic Federation, and it's not aliens. That fundamentally, even the wording of it fundamentally removes you from deeper understanding. It's trickery, because they're not aliens. And people might, it's not nitpicking. It's literally, if you use the wrong language, you cannot enter into higher truth. You have to define things properly. This is a very deep reality to understanding the mysteries, is you have to define things properly. Okay? If you're not defining things properly in your mind and in your physicality, then you can't resonate and access higher truths. This is why very specific symbols were used. And if a symbol was even a little bit wrong, it wouldn't work. It's the same thing with language, okay? So we may think that we may be sloppy and think it doesn't matter, but it does. It does. It's these little departures from reality, these little mislabelings that have a huge effect on our ability to perceive and our ability to know. So, the idea that all of the beings that created us, assisted us, are out there flying around in a spaceship, and these are the highest beings. These are the beings that are going to bring in new technology. These are the beings that are going to, we're going to have first contact with, and we're going to meet our parents, meet the people that have been guiding us from the very beginning. That's false. The reason why it's false is because, again, the highest angels that came through the planetary sphere of Venus, they incarnated into the human life wave. They're not outside. They're not in a spaceship. The most advanced consciousnesses are not outside in a spaceship flying around, talking to different galactic priests and priestesses, channelers. That's not the paradigm. They incarnated into the human form. Okay, so all of that is to stop you from recognizing your divinity. Now, are there beings from other spheres? Yes, but those spheres are literally other developmental paradigms. And the real key to understanding this is that once humanity gets their individuality, so once humanity developed far enough to become an individual and to become sovereign, we were no longer these children that needed to be guided by and essentially dominated by the spiritual hierarchies. We take the training wheels off. And we have to develop on our own, which means we no longer, in any serious or official capacity or anything like that, look to beings from other spheres for anything. And again, the highest beings in the development of the solar system and in the development of our cosmos incarnated into humanity to carry out very important feats to continue the development of the Earth. Okay, so there's an incarnational link between the planetary, in planetary development and in the spiritual hierarchies. And a lot of the teachings, I just don't observe this. It's so important. It's literally so important. And you look out into the cosmic new age and channeling, and it's so backwards. And it keeps people from going inwards and from genuinely understanding our past development. And if we don't understand our past development, if we don't understand, for example, how we were assisted by angelic beings, we're not going to understand spirituality at all, especially once it goes cosmic and we start looking at other spheres and things like that. We have to know exactly how we relate to them. We have to know exactly how the spiritual hierarchy functions. So there's we have to remember as well that we really do kind of live in the upside down. You know, a lot of the information that is the most popular is not the best. I mean, look at Hollywood, look at what's popular and trending all the time on social media. You know, we don't live in a time where the best information and the best people rise to the top. It's a lot of the information that makes it into the mainstream or becomes very popular is you know, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on, right? And so, yeah, that's what I would say there. When we understand the spiritual hierarchies and we understand how our solar system came to be developed, and really that every time a different planetary sphere is developed, a different realm is created, a different realm of development is created, and a different level of density is created. We have to understand these very important keys about cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis. These are imperative that we understand them. Because if we don't understand them, we think that, you know, beings are coming from all these different star systems and that's fine. In reality, again, once the Earth materializes, the Earth is sort of like in a lock. And all the visitations that happened the way that people think it did happened when the Earth was in an etheric and astral form. So we're thinking that all of these things are possible in the more physicalized Earth that were really only possible in the etheric and astral forms of the Earth. So we're conflating developmental phases of the Earth very, very badly and getting this gobbledygook cosmic teachings that don't make any sense. They're not nourishing. They're not going to lead you anywhere. And that's why so much of it is like galactic storytelling and things like this to keep you entertained and to you know, satisfy lower urges, or it's like warnings and clickbait and things like this, because it's not really teaching you anything. You're not really learning about cosmogenesis. You're not really learning about how the solar system forms, how the cosmos forms, and its relationship to the human being and how the human being formed and consciousness and other beings. We're not learning the spiritual science of the thing. We're just entering into it from the most superficial materialistic sense, conflating and mixing things up, and it's not going to lead you into anything meaningful, right? So thank you so much for joining me today, and I've really loved taking your questions. So I'm going to be dropping some more videos where I directly answer your questions in the coming weeks as well. I will also be continuing to obviously lecture on the esoteric keys of disclosure. And if you like this style where I just talk with you about your questions, then consider joining my premium membership site where I do live Q&As basically every second Sunday. And I go for hours and I just address as many questions as I possibly can. So if you like that format and you want to support my work, you want to keep it going, do consider joining my membership page. There's also forums, we do games, we have a whole community of incredible mystics, and I'd love to see you there. So I hope to see you on that side, but if not, I will see you in my next video.